Happily Ever After by Rachanda Gotell. Many of the stories we may read today shows us a reflection on how cultural expectations shape romantic ideals. In class, we read a couple of stories that show us how a person's culture shapes the way they think about being romantic and expressing their love, and so forth, so forth. Out of the three stories of Bamboo River, Honeysuckle, and Lambo, here are the paragraphs that I came up with that caught my attention. Now, starting with Bamboo River, this is the passage I chose. The lieutenant, now captain, had lost none of his old ardor. He went on feeling sorry for himself, and though he was now married to a daughter of the minister of the left, he was not a very attentive husband. He was often heard declaiming or setting down and writing certain thoughts about a sash of Hitachi. Not everyone caught the reference. Now, let me paraphrase this. So, in this paragraph, the lieutenant, some months has passed by, maybe years, and the lieutenant didn't get the opportunity to get the girl he wanted. Although he is married right now to the daughter of the minister of the left, he still is down. He's not happy because he's still heartbroken over the girl who he wanted. And he was not a very attentive husband, like the paragraph mentions. So basically, after all this time, he still feels the heartbreak. His heart hasn't healed yet. And that's what I see from this. And what really stood out for me in this chapter is the simple fact that although everybody else has moved on with his life, he still feels down. He is still feeling bad about the situation because, like the paragraph mentioned, he's married, but that's not who he really want to be with. And people shouldn't be with the ones who they don't want to be with, because you're wasting your time and you're wasting the other person's time. Now, the next story was Honeysuckle. The passage I chose for Honeysuckle was this. Was exiled back to his own land. When furious, the king had seen the love he bore as suit the queen. He stayed in South Wallers for a year, and all the time did not appear at court. But then in his despair, he couldn't bring himself to care what might happen if he went back. It was better to risk death than lack the one thing that counted in his eyes. Now, let me paraphrase this. In this story, you have this guy who's in love with the queen. And the king and everyone finds out, so they tries to get rid of him to keep him away from the queen. But he feels like since the love is so strong, it doesn't matter what happens. He's going to do what it takes to see her. Whether they kill him or not, he's going to try. Like he said, it was better to risk death than lack the one thing that counted in his eyes. So what stood out for me for this was, it was basically telling me that people will do anything for love if you really truly love someone. And that's why love should matter when it comes to finding someone you're going to be with forever. The next story is Lambo. The paragraph I chose from Lambo reads, Lambo received her admonition. Dearest, be sure no one discovers. I charge you this, that we are lovers. Should that happen, this is the cost. Our joy will be forever lost. You'll see me no more, would never hold your arms around me if this is told. Lambo said he would not be swayed from keeping his word. She'd be obeyed. Now, let me paraphrase this. Now, you have people here exchanging some words, sort of a promise, because they know that if they show their love for each other publicly, then it may not be accepted, and then after that, then the joy will be lost, and they may not ever get to see each other again. Although they are in love, they still have to keep it at a minimum, because in this time period, stuff like this wasn't accepted. And this paragraph stood out to me because they're in love and they're on a mutual agreement that they're going to try to keep this on the low. But it shows that back in the day, it was hard to express your love for someone without someone judging you. And judgment was always an issue most of the time. And still today, judgment is an issue in some relationships. But that's why I chose this paragraph from Lamble. Now, I'm going to talk about a connection from one of my favorite stories, or, well, movie, that I instantly thought about after reading these 3 stories. The connection I chose today was Titanic. Now, the Titanic, I'm going to give a little background on the Titanic. In this movie, you have this girl named Rose, and you have her husband, her mother, and her lover, Jack. Rose is not happy with her life. She feels like her mother is pressuring her to marry the guy who she's engaged with. And along the way, she meets this guy named Jack, and she instantly falls in love with him after he saves her. Now, to me, the Titanic is a perfect example for the passages I chose. Now, starting with the Bamboo River, when you have the lieutenant who is has a broken heart. In one part of the movie, Jack was heartbroken because he thought that maybe he couldn't get Rose after all. But eventually, they did get together, but still they were heartbroken. And then to the story Honeysuckle. You have these 2 people that's not supposed to be together. You have this queen, you have this other guy. And just like in Titanic, you have Rose and Jack. They're not supposed to be together because Rose is someone who is a higher class and Jack is some poor little guy. And that's why people was going to judge them because of that. And then in the book Lamble, you have this guy who wants to keep what he have with this lady a secret because they don't want to be judged. And in Titanic, the whole movie is basically based on being judgmental because of where each family come from. And Rose's mother really didn't want her to be with Jack because she always thought about what could Jack possibly give to my daughter when she has this fiance who's going to inherit all this money. And at the end of the day, all 3 of those passages kind of relates to Titanic because of that, because of the situation. And when it comes to love, we always have someone pressuring us to do something that we don't want to do. And that's not really being in love when you're pressured to be with someone who you don't want to be with. You're kind of just with them because you have to, or you feel the need like you have to, because everyone thinks so. So that's how I think that Titanic relates to that, because of Jack and Rose come from 2 different worlds. They're not supposed to be together, and they try to keep their love at a minimum so no one will find out. And when the fiance gets a whiff of it and figure out that they are in love, then he tries to keep him away from his wife or fiance. And then they're instantly judged by everybody because they're in love. And that's how the Titanic relates to that. Okay, based on the connection that I just presented to you about the Titanic, I have 2 questions. What do the connections suggest about human beings' ability to achieve romantic fulfillment, to live happily ever after in medieval cultures or in the present? And also, what seems timeless and what has really changed? Now, referring back to the first question I just asked. Now, the connections suggest that when it comes to romantic fulfillment, to live happily ever after, you have to go through some things. It's not always going to be accepted. You have to do what's good for you instead of doing what's for everybody else. Like in Titanic, Rose and Jack took it upon themselves like, hey, we're going to be together because we want to, instead of listening to everybody else around us. Whereas in the other stories, such as Bamboo River, the lieutenant didn't get the chance to be with the girl whom he wanted. And in the other ones, like in Honeysuckle, The guy did get to speak to the queen, which made him very happy. And in Lamville, it was sort of the same thing that happened. But I feel that to achieve romantic fulfillment, to live happily ever after, it just have to be something that you want and not anybody else. And of course, you're going to go through all the bad times and all the things it may take to get to that point. But at the end of the day, it will be worth it once you reach the romantic fulfillment, because you'll feel a feeling that's unexplainable to others, and they may not understand until they're in your shoes and feel the same thing. Now, the next question was, what seems timeless and what has really changed? I feel that what seems timeless is, like I said before, the being judgmental part, because we're always being judged everywhere, constantly, throughout the old stories, the new stories, and most likely the stories in the future where they're going to be judged. And what has really changed for me, I feel like the perspective on love has changed. Now, back in the day when we thought about love, it was more of, sometimes it wasn't your choice who you got to be with, and most of the time the one who you really loved was the one that you couldn't be with. Whereas today, when we think about love, if you really want to be with somebody, then they make it happen. They make sure the ends meet and they end up with that person. So that's what has changed and what has seemed timeless about the situations. But Titanic, although it is modern, it really does reflect the old stories, and so you will always see a pattern within it. Next, we have the big question. Is romantic fulfillment an elusive dream? How is romantic desire shaped by cultural expectations? Okay, before I read any of the passages or the stories that we read in class, my outlook on romantic fulfillment was, it depends on the individual. But now, after reading each of the stories and stuff, I now understand that romantic fulfillment is not an elusive dream always, but sometimes it is. By me basing it on the story, it kind of is an elusive dream, because it was difficult to obtain the romantic fulfillment based on the culture that the people were in. So yes, my views have changed a little. So romantic fulfillment can be an elusive dream based on your culture. Then again, who are we as Americans? What we say romantic is, it might be a totally different meaning somewhere else. So now I understand a little better. How is romantic desire shaped by cultural expectations? By reading the stories, I saw that everybody's expectation was based on their culture, because in the stories, like the Bamboo River, you really didn't get to choose who you were going to be in love with. Your parents pretty much chose it. And sometimes you couldn't always get who you wanted to get. In the other stories, we saw that love was difficult indeed, because the ones who you love were already taken or in a higher status than you were. So yes, cultural expectations does shape romantic desire and so forth. Now, back to the big question. Like I said before, my views has changed, and by me reading the material, I now do understand that different cultures does have different outlooks on different situations when it comes to love, and their definition of being romantic may be different from ours. So I can say I will revise my answer a little on how I feel about romantic fulfillment. And this concludes my project of Happily Ever After.